Hi, I'm Amy, thank you for tuning in. I've done a couple of videos now and I've decided for this one that I'm going to talk to you about my favourite books. The ones that I've loved since I was a child, the ones that I've picked up along the way, and then the recent books that I've read in the past year and thought they were amazing. So first up, I'll tell you about the book that I first read when it was published when I was 11. And at that point I was reading a lot of Point Horror, Sweet Valley High and Babysitter's Club. And I really enjoyed those books, but it wasn't until this series that I found a world I was really obsessed with and characters that I loved, and that is Northern Lights, and this is my original edition from back in the day. I think I love this book so much, probably because of Lyra. On the very first page, I just was really drawn to that character, and I loved seeing her through the journey she went through and when she met Will, and I think theirs was the first relationship that I was really invested in the book series. So I have a couple of editions of this one, not as many as I'd like. This is a hardcover, signed and numbered one that I think I got from Waterstones at one point. And this is the 20th anniversary edition paperback. So I do like to collect multiple editions of my favourite books, and you'll see when I move on to the next that I sometimes get a little carried away. So that's my first choice. The next choice is a series that came out 10 years ago now. And as soon as I read the first book, I was absolutely desperate for there to be more. And it was probably the book that really got me into fantasy, and that is Daughter of Smoke and Bone. So this is one of the editions I have. Gorgeous hardcover. Not sure whether that's the UK or the US one, but I particularly like those editions. And I'll just show you the others I have before we talk about why I love them so much. There's another hardcover. Recent paperback one that I purchased. I may be in traded for that one, I'm not sure, but that's one that I really like. And one of the new anniversary edition paperbacks. Absolutely gorgeous new artwork. And finally, the Illumicrate version, which I treated myself to. And look at the stained edges. So, the reason I love this series, well, there are absolutely loads of them. I think Laini Taylor's one of those authors that is so creative. The worlds that she invents are absolutely nothing like anybody else's writing. And I think the characters in them are just, although they are sometimes monsters, angels, she creates these amazing characters that are flawed, interesting, they have likeable qualities, and even the villainous characters in this series in particular. One of the villains, I think, has the most amazing character journey out of the whole book and the whole series. So I think Daughter of Smoke and Bone, although I first read it 10 years ago, I've read it a couple of times since, listened to the audiobook a couple of times, and on every reading it just holds up and I learn more things about the world and the characters, and I think that's a real test of a book, that you can still love it after all those readings. So one of my favourite books is one that I first read in my teens, and it's maybe a little bit less known on BookTube than the others I've discussed, so I'll tell you a bit more about it, and that is The Beach by Garland. It was made into a film with Leonardo DiCaprio that I really liked, but the book I just think is definitely worth a read. So to tell you a bit about it, Richard is an English person who goes in search of adventure, and he goes on holiday in Thailand, and he's staying in a hotel, and a mysterious character pushes a map underneath his door with the location of a beach, and he ends up telling this secret to a couple of people that he's just met, and they go and search the beach and they find a community living there. And things are going great for a while, as they usually are in these kinds of books, and then things start to fall apart and this beach is not quite as idyllic as it first appeared. And on the face of it, that sounds quite exciting, but I think what I loved about these books was the fact that you really are inside Richard's head, and he is quite a different character from any book that I've read before. You definitely see him working through things that have happened to him in the past, and his interests really come through. And I think when I was writing Mina and the Undead, that was something that I was thinking about. I wanted you to really get to know Mina and to learn about her character, what makes her tick, how she'd react to certain situations. And I think I got a lot of that from The Beach, so I partially owe publishing my book to this book. But it's just something that I've enjoyed coming back to over the years and found it a really great example of writing and a fantastic story. So that was the original edition that I read, with the distinctive eye on the cover. I also picked up the Leonardo DiCaprio movie tie-in edition. This was a reprint they did at some point. I quite like the colour palette of that one. I have another Leonardo DiCaprio one for some reason. This is probably the pride of possession out of the collection. This is the signed first edition, and I spent a long time tracking this one down, found it on eBay eventually, and I've had it for quite a while now. This is another edition that they did. Another beautiful paperback. See the patterns on that one are quite interesting. And this is the American hardcover that I also ordered online. So quite an eclectic mixture of books really as my favourites. You've got the middle grade, which kind of turns more young adult and adult as the series goes on. The Daughter of Smoke and Bone young adult, and then the adult ones as well. And I think these are books that I will definitely reread, that I really love for different reasons. So if you've enjoyed any of those, let me know on social media which ones. Maybe let me know which covers you prefer as well. So on to the recent reads. I'm one of those people who will tell you that I've got a different favourite read almost every day of the week. And I think that's because I've got to a point now where I generally only read books that I think I'm going to really like. Particularly when I'm being sent books by publishers, I try to only request those that I think are going to be really enjoyable and that I'm going to get something out of. So you'll hear me talk a lot about the books I love. I don't tend to talk about books that I don't enjoy that much, because I don't read that many of them, and I would probably stop reading if I did. So these are some of the recent books that I've loved and that will probably get added to the favourite list at some point. A couple of them you may have heard me talk about on social media, some you maybe haven't. First up is The Creeper Man by Kurtagich. And I would say this isn't necessarily my favourite of Dawn's books. I love all of her writing. I've just chosen this as an example, maybe because the cover is absolutely beautiful. The reason I like Dawn's writing, I'm not going to tell you too much about the books because I feel like they're books that are worth investing the time in yourself, and rather than me spoiling them. Dawn's books, a bit like I said about Laini Taylor's, they are incredibly inventive and fresh, but these are horror of the purest, most psychological. And I think that Dawn is really clever at building that sense of unease in a book and giving you that gradually slow burn feeling that something is wrong. And then when it gets to the real scares, you are invested in the characters and the world. And I think that probably she does horror better than any other author, in my opinion, particularly who's writing YA books. So that's one of my favourites. One of my recent favourites that I've talked a lot about on social media is Harrow by Ellis. Look at that creepy cover and moment to enjoy the yellow edges. So the reason I was drawn to Harrow was the premise where Lola goes to stay in the village where her dad filmed his infamous horror movie and her mum was the star of the film. And I really like the fact that this village had become very invested and involved in this film, and it had become sort of ingrained into its history, and the village has its own dark past anyway. And Lola goes to stay there, and of course creepiness and some really dark horror ensues. I think this book is great at building tension slowly, having some really big standout scares, and keeping you guessing and having lots of fresh, twisty, inventive moments. So Harrow I think is one of those books that will be added to the favourite list. I just feel like I've got to read it a few more times. So another recent favourite that I've discussed a lot is Last One to Die by Cynthia Murphy. Another one where the premise is great, and I think that this straddles probably my favourite two genres at the moment are thriller and horror. And Last One to Die has a really good balance of a mystery that the main character is trying to solve and some really dark horror set pieces and scary moments. So I enjoyed that one a lot. And finally, the most recent release on my list, The Last Girl. I read this towards the end of last year, I believe, might have been the beginning of this year. And I just loved it. It's got that horror and thriller feel to it. And in this one, the main character, Rachel, ends up involved in a club called the Mary Shelley Club. And she is a huge horror movie fan. She uses horror movies to deal with a trauma that's happened to her in the past. And she finds a group who not only love horror movies as much as she does, but they play pranks on people and they test each other to see who can have the greatest scares. So I love that blurb, but I think the thing that I enjoyed the most about this book is the way it is written. You really feel like you're in the character's head. Her interest in horror films, which I think Goldy Moldavsky obviously shares, her interest in horror films really comes across, and I really, really like it. I think it's probably one of the best uses of pop culture in a book that I've come across, and that's something that I enjoy putting in my own writing as well. So, as you can probably tell, I've got quite eclectic taste in reading. Just tell you a little bit more how I read. I read a mixture of Kindle, so ebooks. I read quite a lot from NetGalley. I read a lot of physical proofs that I'm sent as well, and I'm very appreciative of the publishers who do that. And I also read listening to audiobooks, and usually I have one of each type of book at least on the go. So at the moment, I've almost finished listening to The Teeth in the Mist by Dawn Kurtagich on audiobook, and it is incredible. If you're into audiobooks and horror, this is an amazing production. I'm reading Not My Problem by Kira Smith in physical copy and having a great time. And on my Kindle, I'm reading Kat Ellis's brand new book, Wicked Little Deeds, which I've just got a proof of. So thank you, Penguin. It's one of my most anticipated books of the year. And as you can imagine from Kat's writing and what I've said about Kat in the past, she's one of my favourite authors, and this book so far is just as good. Incredibly tense and uneasy, and it's just building towards something, and I'm really excited to find out what that something is. So I hope that video has given you a little bit of an insight into me, what I enjoy, the way I read, and the way I review books as well. So if you've enjoyed that content, I hope you will subscribe and like my video, and check out my future videos. Thank you very much.